California, May 19, 1977. 20-year-old Colleen Stan stands by the side of a dusty highway. She's on her way to a birthday party, a quick trip to see a friend. Hitchhiking, in those days, was almost a rite of passage. She wasn't reckless. Colleen had already turned down 2 rides that morning. One car felt wrong. Another gave her a bad feeling. And then a blue Dodge Colt pulled up. Inside, a young couple, Cameron and Janice Hooker, with their baby daughter in the back seat. A family car. A safe choice. Or so it seemed. Colleen stepped into the car. She had no idea she was stepping into a nightmare that would last not hours, not days, but 7 years. This is the story of Colleen Stan, the story of the girl in the box. Colleen Stan was born in 1956 in Oregon. She was like many young women of her time, independent, adventurous, unafraid to explore the world. At 20, she worked odd jobs, cherished her friends, and dreamed of what her adult life might become. In the late 1970s, hitchhiking was common across America. The culture of the road was alive, young people with backpacks traveling from town to town. But freedom has its risks. And on that May morning, Colleen's freedom collided with a man whose obsession with control would destroy years of her life. Cameron Hooker was not an ordinary man. Beneath his quiet exterior, he harbored disturbing fantasies of dominance and control. His wife, Janice, had married him young and had already endured years of abuse herself. To the outside world, they looked like a normal couple with a child. Inside their private world, Cameron's sadism ruled everything. Together, they would lure Colleen into their trap. Janice would play the role of the reassuring wife, the mother, the presence that disarmed Colleen's suspicions. But Cameron had already prepared something sinister. In the trunk of his car sat a handmade wooden box, a device of terror, a coffin for the living. Colleen Stan's fate was sealed the moment she chose to step inside their car. As the car rolled through the California countryside, conversation flowed easily. The Hookers seemed kind, ordinary. Their baby slept in the back seat. But beneath the surface, Cameron was already planning his move. He drove toward Red Bluff, where he and Janice lived. With every mile, Colleen was being drawn deeper into his world. At one point, they stopped at a gas station. Colleen stepped out to use the restroom. She glanced at the mirror. For a moment, she thought, I could run. I could leave now. But she didn't. She trusted the young couple. And when she climbed back into the car, the opportunity for escape was gone. Not long after, Cameron pulled the car off the main road. He claimed they wanted to explore the woods, to stretch their legs. But Colleen's instincts suddenly screamed danger. And then, the knife. Cameron turned on her with sudden violence. Colleen was forced down. Janice helped restrain her. Together, they locked Colleen's head inside the wooden box Cameron had built. Darkness swallowed her. Air was thin. Panic surged. The world outside gone. In that moment, Colleen Stan's 7-year nightmare began. What Colleen could not know was that the box was not temporary. It was not just for transport. That box would become her world. A prison of wood and nails. A coffin for the living. And the Hooker's home in Red Bluff would become the stage for one of the most horrifying captivity stories in history. The ride had started with easy conversation. Janice cooed at the baby. Cameron asked polite questions. Colleen, though cautious, felt she had made the safe choice. A family, she thought, couldn't be dangerous. But as the miles slipped by, subtle shifts unsettled her. Cameron's silence. The way his eyes lingered too long in the rearview mirror. The heavy wooden box in the back seat, which Colleen could no longer ignore. By the time Cameron pulled off the highway toward the remote backroads of Red Bluff, the air in the car had changed. What began as a ride now carried an undercurrent of menace. Cameron suggested they stop, stretch their legs, maybe enjoy the fresh air of the woods. His tone was casual, but Colleen's instincts screamed danger. Still, she stepped out. She was polite, trusting, the way many young travelers were in the 1970s. But this was no rest stop. It was the perfect place for a trap. Cameron went to the trunk and lifted out the strange box Colleen had noticed earlier. Heavy, lined with foam, with small air holes drilled into the sides. Before Colleen could react, Cameron pulled a knife. The smile vanished. His voice hardened. With Janice's help, Colleen was overpowered. The box came down over her head, tight, suffocating, soundproof. The world went black. Her screams muffled, her breath shallow, her body trembling inside a wooden coffin built for the living. With Colleen locked in the box, Cameron and Janice drove on. For hours, the car moved steadily toward Red Bluff. Inside the box, time ceased to exist. The heat pressed against her skin. Every breath felt stolen. The foam walls closed in like a tomb. She was alive, but already buried in Cameron Hooker's world of control. At last, they arrived at the Hookers' home. From the outside, it looked ordinary, a modest two-story house in a quiet neighborhood. No one looking at that home would ever guess the nightmare inside. Cameron carried Colleen into the basement. There, the initiation into her captivity began. That first night, Colleen endured hours of terror. Cameron chained her, threatened her, and made it clear she no longer controlled her life. Janice, watching from the sidelines, played her role as accomplice. She helped restrain Colleen. She justified it to herself, telling her conscience this arrangement meant Cameron wouldn't hurt her anymore. For Colleen, the realization was crushing. She was no longer a free woman. She was property. Cameron's goal was not simply to restrain Colleen. It was to break her will, to shatter her sense of self. He subjected her to humiliation, fear, and endless threats. He introduced her to the rules of his control. Every scream she let out was met with indifference. Every plea for mercy echoed in the empty basement. By dawn, Colleen knew the truth. This was not random. This was planned. Cameron Hooker had chosen her deliberately, and he intended to keep her. That night was only the beginning. What started as abduction would soon evolve into something much darker. Cameron had built not just a prison for Colleen's body, but a system to enslave her mind. And at the heart of it all was the box, the coffin-sized structure that would define her existence. The girl who once stood carefree by the side of a California road was gone. In her place was the girl in the box. Abduction is a moment. Captivity is a lifetime. For Colleen Stan, the moment of abduction was over. The years of captivity were just beginning. And what awaited her was not just physical imprisonment, but psychological chains so strong, even freedom would not feel real. For most of us, a bed is a place of comfort. For Colleen Stan, her bed became a coffin. Cameron Hooker had designed the box not simply as a restraint, but as an instrument of domination. Inside, Colleen could not sit. She could not stand. She could barely shift her position. Every movement was constrained. Every breath was shallow. During the day, Cameron slid the box under his bed. Above her, he and Janice slept, ate, laughed, and lived their lives, while beneath them, Colleen lay entombed in silence. This was not a temporary punishment. It became her reality, for hours, for days, for years. The box measured roughly 6 feet long, 2.5 feet wide, and less than 2 feet high. It was lined with foam to muffle sound, with small air holes drilled for breathing. In summer, the box became an oven, temperatures inside soaring to unbearable levels. In winter, it became a freezer. For 23 hours a day, Colleen endured this tomb, emerging only briefly to eat, relieve herself, or to suffer Cameron's rituals of control. It was a prison not of bars and guards, but of wood, nails, and silence. Inside the box, time became meaningless. Colleen counted seconds by the rhythm of her breath, minutes by the distant footsteps above her, hours by the groans of the bed springs as Cameron and Janice moved in their sleep. Her body stiffened, muscles atrophied, skin broke down from pressure. But the greater torment was mental. Darkness became her only companion. Isolation became her only certainty. The silence was broken only by the sound of her own heartbeat and the echo of her mind begging for freedom. On rare occasions, Colleen was allowed out of the box. Cameron would feed her scraps of food. He would let her shower briefly. But freedom, even in those moments, was an illusion. Shackles remained. Threats never ceased. And then, inevitably, he would return her to the box. The lid slammed shut. Darkness swallowed her once again. The cycle repeated endlessly, enough to destroy a person's will. But Colleen's will endured. Janice Hooker knew exactly where Colleen was. She lived with the box under her bed. At first, she rationalized it. She believed keeping Colleen as Cameron's prisoner protected her from his violence. She told herself it was better this way. But deep down, she knew. She watched another woman suffer while she turned a blind eye. For Colleen, this betrayal was another form of imprisonment. Even the woman who could have freed her chose silence. The human mind craves stimulation. Without it, reality fractures. Locked in a box, Colleen's senses dulled. Days blurred into nights. Her thoughts spun in endless circles. She prayed. She imagined conversations with loved ones. She replayed memories of sunlight and freedom. But no matter how far her mind wandered, the box always brought her back. Back to darkness. Back to silence. Back to Cameron's control. Cameron did not merely confine Colleen. He imposed rules. She was to obey without question. She was to remain silent unless spoken to. She was to accept pain as punishment. Every violation was met with threats, not only against her, but against her family. Cameron told Colleen she was no longer a person. She was an object, property, a slave. And in the silence of the box, those words echoed louder than any scream. Days became months. Months became years. For over 3 years, Colleen's world was defined by the box. She emerged only when Cameron demanded. She lived under his roof, under his bed, under his absolute control. Her name became meaningless. Her past life faded like a dream. To the world outside, she had simply vanished. To Cameron, she was no longer Colleen Stan. She was his prisoner. And to herself, she feared she was nothing at all. Captivity is more than chains and locks. It is silence. It is darkness. It is the slow erosion of identity until nothing remains but obedience. For Colleen Stan, the wooden box was more than a prison. It was a tomb for her humanity. But Cameron Hooker's cruelty went beyond confinement. He sought to control not just Colleen's body, but her very mind. For most captives, the greatest barrier is the lock and the key. For Colleen Stan, the greatest barrier was invisible. It was the prison of her mind. Cameron Hooker knew how to inflict pain. But more importantly, he knew how to instill fear. Fear became the lock. Lies became the chains. And Colleen's own mind became the box she could not escape. Cameron's cruelty was not only physical. He was cunning enough to create an elaborate fiction, a story designed to enslave Colleen completely. He told her about an organization he called the Company. According to Cameron, the Company was vast, powerful, and all-seeing. They monitored her every move. They controlled her fate. If she disobeyed, they would kill her. If she tried to escape, they would harm her family. The Company, Cameron claimed, owned her now. She was not a woman. She was property, a slave bound by contract. To cement this illusion, Cameron drafted a contract, a document declaring Colleen his slave. It detailed her duties, her silence, her obedience. Under pressure, Colleen signed. In that moment, she believed she had legally surrendered her humanity. The paper was worthless in the eyes of the law, but in Colleen's mind, it was binding. It was a symbol that she no longer belonged to herself. And Cameron reinforced this belief at every opportunity. Cameron planted seeds of fear carefully. He claimed company agents watched her from outside, that phone calls were monitored, that neighbors were part of the network. Every sound in the night, every unexpected knock at the door, Colleen believed it was the Company keeping her in line. And the punishment for defiance? Death, not just for her, but for her parents, her sisters, everyone she loved. The fear was so strong that Colleen could not risk testing it. There were times Cameron let Colleen outside. She tended the garden. She did chores. On rare occasions, she walked in public. And yet, she never tried to run. Why? Because she truly believed escape was impossible. She could have screamed. She could have begged for help. But in her mind, the Company was always there, watching, waiting, ready to kill. This was the genius and the horror of Cameron's control. He did not need chains to bind Colleen. He only needed her belief. Over time, the lies seeped deeper. Colleen began to lose her sense of self. She was no longer Colleen Stan. She was the slave. Every choice, every thought, every word revolved around Cameron's commands. This was not just captivity of the body. It was the destruction of identity. And in that destruction, Cameron found ultimate power. Perhaps the most haunting proof of Cameron's psychological grip came during a family visit. In 1981, for years in her captivity, Colleen was permitted to visit her parents. She sat at the table. She smiled for photos. She hugged her family. And she said nothing. Not a word about the box. Not a word about the company. Her parents sensed something was wrong. She looked thin, subdued. But Colleen convinced them she was happy, working for a family who treated her well. When the visit ended, she willingly returned with Cameron and Janice. That is the power of psychological imprisonment. Even when freedom was within reach, Colleen did not take it, because she believed she couldn't. By the early 1980s, Cameron had created the perfect captive. Colleen no longer needed chains. She obeyed instinctively. She believed escape meant death. She accepted her life as Cameron's property, and Cameron thrived on that obedience. He had succeeded in reducing a vibrant young woman into an object, not by brute force, but by rewriting her reality. But psychological prisons, like all prisons, eventually crack. And the first crack would come not from Colleen, but from Janice Hooker herself. Chains can be broken, locks can be picked, but fear can last forever. For 7 years, Colleen Stan lived in terror of an organization that did not exist. Cameron Hooker's lies became her law. His threats became her reality. His control became her identity. But even the strongest illusions eventually unravel. And when they did, it was not Colleen who destroyed them. It was Janice. The woman who had once been Cameron's accomplice would become his undoing. For most of her captivity, Colleen Stan lived inside a wooden box beneath a bed. But there were moments when Cameron allowed her to step outside, moments when freedom was within reach. She tended the garden. She hung laundry. She even spoke with neighbors. And yet, she never tried to run. She never screamed for help. She never whispered the truth. To outsiders, she looked like a quiet, submissive housekeeper. To Colleen, she was still a slave bound by the invisible chains of the company. Cameron used Colleen not only for his sadistic desires, but also for labor. She became the family servant. Cooking, cleaning, babysitting, whatever was demanded, she obeyed. The Hooker's children grew up around her, calling her their nanny. To them, she was simply part of the household. They never suspected she was living in a box when the day was done. The cruelty of it all lay in the normalcy. Colleen washed dishes, folded laundry, and played with the children, only to be locked back inside her coffin each night. For Colleen, these brief tasks were her only taste of freedom. The sun on her skin, the air in her lungs, the sound of birds overhead. For a moment, she remembered what it meant to be human. But she never lingered too long. Fear was always beside her. The company was always watching, at least in her mind. And so, even in the open air, Colleen remained a prisoner. In 1981, 4 years after her abduction, Cameron did something unthinkable. He allowed Colleen to visit her family. He told her the company was testing her. If she spoke a word, her family would die. At the dinner table, Colleen's parents were overjoyed to see her. But they noticed changes. She was thinner, quieter, oddly submissive. Her answers were short. Her smile seemed forced. When asked about her life, Colleen claimed she was working for a family, caring for their children. She even introduced Cameron as her boyfriend. To her family, it looked like an abusive relationship. They worried. They asked questions. But Colleen gave nothing away. And when the visit ended, she willingly returned to the Hookers, to the box, to the nightmare. It is the question that haunts this case. Why didn't Colleen run? The answer lies in psychology. Fear is a powerful leash. Cameron's story of the company was so convincing, so terrifying, that Colleen believed her family's lives depended on her silence. To her parents, she looked like a woman who had made strange choices. To Colleen, she was protecting them from a fate worse than her own captivity. Incredibly, Cameron sometimes allowed Colleen to use the telephone. Once, she even called her family. She spoke calmly, offering reassurances. But even with the lifeline in her hand, she never told the truth. Because she believed the line was tapped, that the company was listening. That one wrong word would mean her parents' execution. The illusion was complete. Cameron did not need bars or locks. He needed only the story he had created. For 7 years, Colleen lived this way, alternating between suffocating darkness and the deceptive light of false freedom. Neighbors saw her. Children played with her. Her parents embraced her. And yet, no one knew she was a prisoner. She had learned to act the role Cameron demanded. Obedient, silent, submissive. The girl who once thumbed a ride down a California highway no longer existed. In her place stood a shadow, trained to obey. Colleen Stan had been given glimpses of freedom, sunlight, family dinners, even phone calls. But freedom is meaningless when your mind has been caged. The company's shadow haunted her every step. Her silence became her survival. Her obedience became her identity. And yet, the lies that held her captive were destined to crumble. Not because Colleen found the courage to run, but because Janice Hooker, Cameron's wife, could no longer live with the truth. For years, Colleen Stan lived in a coffin-sized box beneath the Hooker's bed. She slept beside her husband. All the while, another woman suffered in silence, just inches away. Janice knew. She always knew. And for years, she said nothing. Janice Hooker was not simply a bystander. She was Cameron's wife and his victim. Married young, she had endured years of abuse. Cameron's domination over her was absolute. He had convinced her that Colleen's captivity was necessary. To Janice, Colleen was a sacrifice, a way to protect herself from Cameron's sadism. If Colleen absorbed his violence, perhaps she and the children would be safe. It was a cruel bargain. A woman traded another woman's freedom for her own survival. At times, Janice actively participated. She helped restrain Colleen during the abduction. She enforced Cameron's rules. When Colleen questioned the company, Janice reinforced the lie. She told Colleen it was real. She played her part in the fiction that kept Colleen silent. Her complicity blurred the line between victim and perpetrator. To the outside world, Janice was a wife and mother. To Colleen, she was both jailer and fellow prisoner of Cameron's control. But Janice's silence did not last forever. As years passed, guilt gnawed at her. The sound of Colleen's muffled cries beneath the bed. The sight of her pale, broken figure emerging from the box. The weight of the secret pressed down like a stone. Janice turned to religion. She sought counsel from her church. Slowly, her loyalty to Cameron began to fracture. She no longer saw Colleen as the sacrifice for her survival. She saw her as the mirror of her own suffering. And with that realization came the first cracks in Cameron's empire of control. By 1984, 7 years into Colleen's captivity, Janice made a decision. She told Colleen the truth. The company does not exist. The revelation was earth-shattering. For years, Colleen had believed escape meant certain death. Now, with a single confession, the illusion crumbled. Colleen was stunned. She had been free all along, yet trapped by lies. Janice promised to help her leave. For the first time, hope returned. Janice's betrayal of Cameron was not sudden. It was the culmination of years of fear, guilt, and disillusionment. She had lived under his rule, endured his abuse, and justified his cruelty. But in the end, she chose to side with Colleen. By exposing the lie of the company, Janice stripped Cameron of his most powerful weapon, psychological control. Without fear, the prison collapsed. Janice guided Colleen out of the house, out of the box, out of 7 years of darkness. For Colleen, it was a rebirth, the first steps into freedom. For Janice, it was a final act of rebellion against the man who had ruled them both. The woman who once helped imprison Colleen now became the woman who set her free. When the truth finally reached police, Janice struck a deal. In exchange for her testimony against Cameron, she was granted full immunity. Some saw her as a hero, the key to Colleen's rescue. Others saw her as a coward, a woman who allowed another to suffer for years before finding her conscience. Her role remains one of the most debated elements of the case. But without Janice, Colleen may never have been freed. Without Janice, Cameron might never have faced justice. For 7 years, Janice Hooker was both accomplice and witness. She lived above the box, raising children while another woman lived entombed beneath her bed. Her silence was complicity. Her words were deception. But her confession became salvation. In the end, Janice was both jailer and liberator, the woman who helped build the prison and the woman who tore it down. For 7 years, Colleen Stan had lived in a world of shadows. The company watched her. Escape meant death. Silence was survival. And then, with a single sentence, Janice Hooker shattered it all. The company isn't real. Those words detonated like a bomb in Colleen's mind. The invisible chains fell away. The prison that bound her was not steel or wood, but fear. And suddenly, for the first time in years, Colleen could see the possibility of freedom. Janice's decision to confess did not come easily. For years, she had lived under Cameron's domination, trapped in his cycle of abuse. But guilt had corroded her silence. Her faith had awakened her conscience, and she could no longer bear the weight of another woman's suffering. So she chose to betray Cameron, not only for Colleen, but for herself and for her children, who were growing up in a house poisoned by secrets. Janice promised Colleen, "This ends now." It did not take a dramatic chase. It did not require a daring escape in the night. When Colleen finally left, it was in broad daylight. After years of entrapment, Cameron no longer saw her as a flight risk. His confidence in the company's lie was absolute. He believed Colleen would never disobey. And so, when Janice told Colleen it was time to go, she simply walked out the front door. Each step was heavy, trembling. But with every step, the box beneath the bed became nothing more than wood and nails. Colleen walked away from 7 years of silence, 7 years of fear, 7 years of being a ghost beneath another family's bed. The world outside felt unreal. The air too sharp, the sky too vast. After years in a box, even freedom was overwhelming. But she was free. For the first time since 1977, she was her own. Colleen returned to her parents, the people she had seen but never warned during those strange, silent visits. When she told them the truth, they were horrified. For years, they had believed she was living in some strange, controlling relationship. They could not have imagined the reality, that their daughter had been a slave in a box beneath a bed. Their relief was tempered with guilt. Could they have seen more? Could they have saved her sooner? But Colleen reminded them, she had been powerless. The company had stolen her voice, and Cameron Hooker had stolen 7 years of her life. And Cameron Hooker? He did nothing. His empire of lies had crumbled, but he refused to believe it. He convinced himself Colleen would come back, that even without chains, she remained his. His arrogance was his undoing. For a time, he carried on as though nothing had changed. But Janice, now free of his grip, went to the police. She exposed everything, the abduction, the box, the company. And Cameron Hooker's delusion of control collapsed in the face of the law. Investigators who entered the Hooker home were stunned. They found the box. They heard Janice's testimony. They listened to Colleen's account of years of abuse. It was almost impossible to comprehend. A young woman living as a hidden prisoner, right beneath a family's bed. But the evidence was undeniable. Cameron Hooker's reign of terror was over. Colleen Stan's escape was not a cinematic chase through the night. It was not a dramatic breaking of chains. It was the quiet unraveling of lies. The courage of a wife who turned against her husband, and the strength of a woman who endured the unendurable until truth set her free. Colleen's survival was not defined by her silence, but by her resilience, by her ability to reclaim life after years in the dark. And her story was not over. The final chapter would play out in a courtroom, where Cameron Hooker would face justice for the horror he had created. For 7 years, Colleen Stan lived in the shadows, entombed in wood, chained by fear, silenced by lies. And yet, she walked away. She lived. She endured. She escaped. But survival was only the beginning. In 1984, After Janice confessed to police, Cameron Hooker's carefully constructed world collapsed. Investigators entered his home and found the box. They found the tools of restraint. They heard Colleen's testimony and Janice's damning account of her husband's cruelty. The story shocked even seasoned detectives. A woman kept in a box beneath a bed for 7 years? It sounded like fiction, but the evidence was undeniable. The nightmare was real. In 1985, Cameron Hooker stood trial. The charges included kidnapping, sexual assault, and torture. The courtroom was packed. Reporters crowded the steps. The world wanted to know how such horror could exist in an ordinary American town. Colleen, courageous beyond measure, took the stand. She recounted her ordeal, the box, the company, the years of silence. Jurors listened in disbelief as she described life in a coffin, the manipulation that silenced her, the fear that consumed her. Janice testified as well. She admitted her complicity, but painted a vivid picture of Cameron's sadism and control. Her testimony, though controversial, sealed his fate. After weeks of testimony, the jury delivered its verdict, guilty. Cameron Hooker was sentenced to 104 years in prison, a century behind bars for 7 years of unimaginable cruelty. The sentence was hailed as justice. But for Colleen, no prison term could restore what was stolen from her. The years lost, the innocence shattered, the shadow of trauma that would follow her for life. Janice Hooker walked free. In exchange for her testimony, she had been granted full immunity. Some called her a savior, the woman who ended Colleen's captivity. Others called her a coward, an accomplice who enabled 7 years of suffering before finding her conscience. To this day, Janice's role remains one of the most debated elements of the case. Was she a victim, a perpetrator, or both? For Colleen Stan, freedom was not the end of her struggle. She married, raised children, and tried to rebuild her life. But the scars of captivity ran deep. The box may have been left behind, but the memory of it never left her. She chose a quiet life, away from the spotlight. Occasionally, she spoke publicly, not for fame, but to give voice to survival, to remind the world that even in the darkest box, the human spirit can endure. The case of Colleen Stan became infamous worldwide. She was branded the girl in the box, a name that reduced her to the object of her suffering, yet also made her a symbol of survival. Her story raised awareness about psychological captivity, coercive control, and the ways victims can be silenced without visible chains. It forced law enforcement, courts, and the public to confront a chilling truth: that imprisonment does not always require bars. Sometimes it requires only fear. Cameron Hooker remains in prison. His parole hearings have sparked public outrage, with many insisting he should never walk free. He has never expressed remorse. To him, his crimes were justified by his twisted fantasies of control. For Colleen and her family, his continued imprisonment is the only form of justice left. In 1977, Colleen Stan accepted a ride that changed her life forever. For 7 years, she endured silence, darkness, and fear inside a wooden box. But she also endured. She survived. She escaped. Her story is one of cruelty, but also of resilience. A reminder of the strength of the human spirit in the face of unimaginable horror. Colleen Stan will forever be known as the girl in the box. But she is also something more, a woman who walked out of darkness, carrying with her a story the world must never forget. If you enjoy this, subscribe, like, and comment for more.